form a contact with some sort of extraterrestrial group?
Yes, they made contact with one of the Draco Alliance groups. And it was when they drew a picture of the face, a lot of people today say it looks like the gray, or the reptoids, which look very much like the grays, except they're reptilian looking.
Was that group here already before they made contact, or did the contact draw them over to our solar system?
The Draco, according to the glass pad, smart glass pad, had been here at least 375,000 years. And they considered Earth theirs.
What do they look like? Where are they from? What's their story?
Well, the Draco are, most people picture them as only these large reptilian group. But the Draco Alliance is made up of a lot of different beings. Most of them have some sort of reptilian blood in them, some sort of reptilian genetics. And I guess you could say they're very genetic purists. They like to have beings involved in their alliance that have some sort of reptilian genetics. But there have also been other insectoid type beings that have been associated with the Draco Alliance.
These, when you say reptilians, you're talking about a humanoid body,
Right,
but with a reptile type appearance to it?
right. Reptilian skin, reptilian eyes, muscular build, reptilian disposition, very aggressive, and what a lot of people probably would picture as a demon. It's probably where a lot of the demon and devil ideas came from, the way they were depicted in medieval art.
And you also said reptoid as if it was something different from reptilian. So could you explain the difference?
Yeah, the reptoids they have a little bit, they have a more narrow jaw, elongated head that looks, and eyes that are larger. They look a lot like what people picture as the alien that you would see stamped on a sign at Roswell. The typical gray.
But there would be a difference between a gray and a reptoid.
Definitely, and there are a whole lot of different beings that get thrown into the gray category. There's a lot of confusion with grays. There are quite a few different types of beings that get tossed into that category.
So why is the term Draco being used for these people?
I don't know the genesis of the name. I don't know if the name is something that came from them or comes from a more ancient derived manner. I don't know where the actual name comes from. I've heard all of the stuff that's on the internet about the Draco star cluster and that kind of stuff, but I don't know for certain.
But the term Draco sounds a lot like dragon.
It does, right? Yeah.
And Dracula, I guess, would be another kind of similar thing.
But I don't know which, the chicken or the egg. I don't know which came first.
This obviously starts to get immediately into the David Icke kind of stuff. To your personal knowledge, are there people on Earth that are reptilians that shapeshift to look like human beings?
The only type of shape-shifting that we encountered when we intercepted beings was done through a technological means.
Okay. So this idea that the so-called Illuminati are in fact reptilians that are masquerading as human beings and they don't look like that at all is not anything you encountered in your line of work.
It's not anything I encountered.
So just briefly, if you have, we've talked about avians that look human, but they have bird-like features. Now we're talking about reptilians that look human but have bird-like features. Is the biome that we have on Earth, meaning single-celled organisms, algae, vegetables, plants, mammals, fish, birds, reptiles, is that type of thing of a fairly common pattern for worlds that are Earth-like in our galaxy?
Yes, and it seems to be some sort of there's some sort of humanoid template.
Right. So different types of beings that we see on Earth could evolve into a human-like form depending on the conditions of that planet.
Right.
And you're saying the Draco basically were like interstellar racists and found others who had evolved out of reptilian life or insectoid type life, and that was their preferred group.
Right. Or they genetically interfered one or the other.
What was their objective in coming here in the first place? What did they want from our solar system or from humans on Earth?
Conquest, furthering their dynasty, their Draco alliance they're all about spreading their empire.
So the German occult societies were they contacted, or did they try to make contact with the Draco? How did that actually happen?
They reached out and made contact consciously to this group.
Through this Vril society?
Right.
And you also said that there was a Nordic-looking group?
The German secret societies had been doing a whole bunch of expeditions, and as they were in the area of the Himalayas, they ran into a group of Nordic-looking beings that presented themselves as alien ETs, and they were actually a ancient human breakaway civilization that had existed under the Himalayas for tens of thousands of years.
Under the Himalayas?
Right, and further on, in a network of cities connected underneath the ground.
Had they reoccupied the stuff that was built by this so-called ancient builder race?
Yes, but they had actually built out a very, very sophisticated high-tech. They were a very sophisticated high-tech civilization on their own.
Really?
And they built out their own high-tech infrastructure.
But this was one of these underground areas, as you said before, that has the bioluminescent bacteria and has trees and running water and its own evolutionary path of animals and fish and birds and all that kind of stuff?
But theirs was closer to the surface, underneath mountains and networks that reached down to that area. And they called themselves the Agartha Network.
Really?
That was according to the documentation. And they had a space fleet or a space program that they called the Silver Fleet.
This sounds a lot like people who have been contacted by what they think are extraterrestrials. The so-called Nordic ETs, a pretty common thing you hear about.
Yes, that happened a lot by this group that pretended to be ETs. And later on, that also happened by this German group that created a breakaway civilization with using technology they obtained from the Draco and this Agarthan group under the Himalayas.
Do you think these Agarthans are the reason why the Germans became so obsessed with blonde hair and blue eyes and said it was a master race?
Most likely.
What did the Agarthans tell the Germans about themselves? Where did they say they were from?
I believe they said they were from the Pleiades or something like that originally. So
take us now through the origin of the space program based on these contacts. First of all, did the Draco and the Agarthans get along with each other? Did they know about each other? Did they have some kind of partnership?
They they had a tenuous, they had an understanding. They weren't allies. The Draco do not play well with others that don't bow before their feet. But they had an understanding to stay out of each other's hair and scales.
So how does this turn into space travel? Who gave the Germans the space travel capability? How did that develop? Because obviously you're not going to build a space program without space travel.
Right. Well, the Germans were very intelligent, and they had already made some pretty excellent discoveries on their own. They, from observing nature and the fact that, unlike in the West, they didn't, like I said before, they didn't separate science from spirituality and some esoteric beliefs. They actually would use some esoteric beliefs, some of what we would call magic or black magic. At the same time, they used science. They mixed it. And this actually gave them an edge.
Did you ever run across the work of Victor Schauberger in any of the documentation you saw?
Yes. He originally studied the fish or the trout traveling up the stream, up the waterfalls and stuff.
It appears that Schauberger saw that there was some kind of anti-gravity effect with trout and salmon swimming up a 30-foot high waterfall and just kind of gliding their way up.
Yeah. Okay.
So did you encounter any information suggesting that Schauberger was on the right track, that he actually did invent something real?
There were, not only him, there were several German and Polish and I believe other scientists that were having some pretty good, interesting breakthroughs that had that information confiscated and brought into these secret societies.
Did these extraterrestrial groups like the Draco and the Agarthans give assistance to the Germans at some point so they could perfect or make a greater development of progress with what they were already working on?
Yes. They had already started to build some pretty interesting devices based on some ancient texts and information they had found on the Vermana, creating mercury vortex electrogravitic devices that created gravity canceling technology.
When you say mercury vortex, what are you referring to? What would this technology look like if we were going to see it?
Basically in a glass cylinder with mercury in it. They would spin it at extremely high velocities.
Like a ring? A glass ring?
In like a glass cylinder.
Oh, a vertical cylinder.
Right.
Okay.
Or sometimes in a
sphere.
But usually it was in a cylinder. And then it would, from the top and the bottom, they would spin it at very high velocities and then apply very high voltage to it.
And that causes anti-gravity.
Yes. And then they started doing counter-rotating copper plates as well, involved in it as well.
So I know one of the books that I've seen that really talks about this Bellcraft quite a bit is The Hunt for Zero Point by Nick Cook. He's done a lot of really original research on this subject. So, to your knowledge, when was the first Bellcraft actually constructed and became operational? At least they got some kind of an effect out of it.
Not quite sure. I can't really remember the exact dates and details from what I was reading. It was, they were doing this stuff in the early 40s.
Okay.
I do remember some of the accounts I read about the Bell. I remember they had several that they had tethered that had broke loose from the tethering and had pretty much just disappeared.
Really?
And then they had others. I mean, and it was a process, scientific process. And supposedly there were some scientists that died from getting too close, and they had some explosions, and they had a lot of problems getting that started.
Did they have little propellers that whirled the mercury around inside the cylinder, or how did they make it move?
From what I understood, there was an actual huge electrical cable that went to it and fed electricity to motors that spun very high RPMs and spun the mercury around. And interesting thing that happened, that something that was dealt with later, is they discovered that heavy electricity, I mean seriously heavy electricity, applied to mercury causes the mercury to turn into gold.
Really? Like alchemy?
Like alchemy. And these cylinders, glass cylinders, kept the mercury kept turning to like a coral looking gold. And this was seen as a problem. Creating gold was seen as a problem.
Why would that matter? Wouldn't they want gold?
No, they needed a golem or gallum metal, liquid metal, that would stay liquid at high temperatures, high speed, high RPMs, and that would conduct electricity for long periods of time without transmuting. And they eventually engineered a different liquid metal.
But what would happen to the craft if it starts turning into gold?
It becomes unstable and crashes.
Really? Very interesting. Did the Draco or the Agarthans give them direct assistance to make this Bellcraft work better, to solve the gold problem, as one example?
Yes, it was after they got to a certain point of technological achievement and ongoing, I guess, diplomatic relations with both these groups that they started getting scientific help in the form of liaisons coming in and helping them, and them almost like scientist exchanges. And once they developed a stable working anti-gravitic craft, they then started to form more and more of a, I guess, breakaway society from the German dictatorship or the German leadership, and started to keep more things secret and do things their own way.
So you're saying this is not necessarily Nazi?
No.
It's more the German occult secret societies?
Right. Those secret societies ended up creating Nazism.
But Nazism broke away from them somehow and didn't adhere to what they wanted?
I guess that was more of a mainstream government control the people kind of thing.
Right.
They were more interested in starting their own breakaway civilization that had nothing to do with any groups, to have their own civilization, their own master race, their own
Speech on.
space
10%
program.
close,
They had high ideas.
Speech off.
In the Hunt for Zero Point, Nick Cook, doing his research on this Bellcraft, said that the Nazi code name for the project was Kronos, which means time. And he said in the book that, and this was based on documents that he was able to find, that apparently time started to get weird when they began playing around with this. Did you encounter any information of that sort?
Yeah, time, when you're playing with electrogravitic technology, time and space, the veil between them thins. So you start to have anomalies.
So what would be an example of an anomaly?
Well, an anomaly would be you would travel, anytime you're traveling at a certain speed, not only are you traveling a distance, you're traveling in time. And if they create a situation to where they jump from one place to another really quickly, they have not only jumped in space, but they have also time traveled.
Wow.
So it starts to blur. The time-space veil starts to blur.
Well, we're out of time for this episode, but I think what we're going to have to do is continue this discussion because we haven't even really gotten into how these German occult societies then made their way
Speech
into
on.
space, and I want to just stay